So welcome everyone to our 3 p.m. capsule. It is entitled Meeting the Horned God of the Witches, a literary review. This session features our fantasy studies sector and will be presented by Dr. Anna Milon. Anna Milon. Sorry about that, Anna. All right. Great to see you here. Anna, I'm just going to give you a short introduction. So, a bit more about Dr. Milon. Anna is a PhD researcher at the University of Exeter with a thesis on the horned god in fantasy fiction and live action roleplay. With a BA in literature from Royal Holloway, University of London, and an MA in medieval literatures and languages from the University of York. She has taught space modules on witches and witchcraft. Great to have you here, Anna. I'm just going to share a couple questions that are fun to get people thinking about this topic. How old is the horned god? Where do you think he originated from? Are the horned god and the green man the same entity? Pan, Cernunnos, I might not be saying that right, Herne the Hunter. Do you know any other names the horned god is known by? Over to you, Anna.
Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful introduction, Rob. I would like to add a couple apologies. First of all, this little tyke was supposed to be asleep for this, but she's not. So I'm sure she will get something out of this, as I hope you all do too. Also, I've only just realized that my bio is a year out of date. I have, in fact, defended my thesis and become a doctor, and have since embarked on a postdoctoral fellowship to do with Lincolnshire folklore, so completely off the wall. But I'm just going to share my screen for a presentation on meeting the horned god of the witches.
Anna, I just wanted to say your baby's beautiful and adorable.
Thank you so much. That's
That's
ever so
it.
kind. Right. So, in an ideal world, you should be able to see a full screen presentation without the notes. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Oh, yeah, we don't see notes on that slide. Do you want to just move to another slide, Anna, just so we can double check?
Right.
Okay, we do see the notes in that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Let me just quickly try to port you over to the not the presenter's view, just a mo. Right. I can, there we go. Present full screen.
Alternatively, Anna, I can also share your slides if that would help.
I think we're about to get there. The joys of technology. Give me a piece of paper and a pen any day. There we go. And I shall go off piste and see how much of my thesis I remember. Full screen. Right. Is that working for everyone?
It's working great. Thank you.
Superb. Welcome everyone to Meeting the Horned God of the Witches, in which I will endeavour to answer those tantalising questions that Rob posed at the start. But first of all, a bit of why am I here? As Rob mentioned, I wrote a whole thesis on the Horned God. That's over 5 years of study of the Horned God, both as a spiritual figure, currently being worshipped as a deity, and as a whole body of different literary characters. But also, my research is very much ongoing, and I'm always looking for people who have either spiritual experiences of this figure or who are passionate about his appearances in literary and historical material. So here are some examples. This is on the left is the provisional cover for my thesis, featuring some examples of the horned god in situ. And on the right, of course, is the statue of Cernunnos out of wicker outside the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Cornwall. I know it's tough being you. So who is the horned god? At his very basic, the horned god is a anthropomorphic deity with his human features being combined with those of various antlered animals such as stags or rams or goats, and he is worshipped by some modern pagans as the embodiment of wild, untamed nature. He's associated with journeys to the underworld and sometimes with wealth and fertility as well. The horned god of the pagans is a holistic deity. He is a figure you can recognize as a single sort of god. But this is also a title given to a variety of historical deities. So Rob listed some of them. One is Cernunnos, the other is Pan, the other is the Sorcerer of Trois Frères, which is this interesting prehistoric carving, which we'll touch on in a little bit. So the horned god is both singular, but there are also many horned gods that kind of feed into this one figure. He's also a palimpsest fictional character, an assemblage of one or many figures from the previous two categories. And what I mean by palimpsest is that authors of fiction really pick and choose different elements of the historical and religious figures of horned gods to create their various characters. One of the better known examples of a horned god in fiction is Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising, the second installment of her The Dark is Rising series, where Will Stanton meets the mysterious masked hunter. Now, officially, the character is called Herne the Hunter, but he also has attributes of Cernunnos and of the Sorcerer of Trois Frères that makes him this more encompassing horned god type. I should have been clicking to provide you with some example images. Here is Old Horny, the horned god denizen of the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. He's recently had a pedicure. His feet got damaged and they were recovered, but he's very much a kind of human with goat legs and a goat head. Here's Cernunnos, or one of the images of Cernunnos in Gunderstrop Cauldron, who is just a man with stag's antlers, or potentially a very fetching stag-antlered hat. And here's another novel featuring a horned god, that's Stag Boy by William Rayner. Who kind of created or rather popularized the horned god? That honor goes to Egyptologist and anthropologist Margaret Murray, who taught in University College London in England and was in fact the first female lecturer to teach archaeology and Egyptology in the UK. And after establishing her career in archaeology under the famous archaeologist Flinders Petrie, who notably excavated the Dendera temple, but that's a separate story, she decided to explore the history of witchcraft and to propose the witch cult hypothesis, that is this theory that people accused of witchcraft in the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe and in North America were inheritors of an ancient, persisting, prehistoric fertility cult that has coexisted alongside Christianity for millennia. This theory has been summarily debunked by academics as historically spurious, but it has given some very powerful images and some very powerful narratives to the budding Wicca movement in the 1950s and 60s. And one of those images is the horned god. Now, Murray was one of the better known names to take the various horned and antlered deities of history across the globe and to propose that they all spoke to this same human desire and could be seen as in some way linked. Today, for the purpose of time, we shall focus on just one horned god, and that is Cernunnos. Now, Cernunnos is sometimes used as an interchangeable name for the horned god, but realistically, he's just one figure under that under that wider umbrella. And it doesn't help matters that, of course, the name literally means the horned one, hence the root kern, which is where we get our word for horn. Now, our association of the name Cernunnos with the image of a seated antlered man comes from a single archaeological find discovered in 1711 in Paris during the refurbishment of Notre Dame de Paris. It was interpreted by gemologist Charles César Baudelot de Darval, a member of the Royal Academy of Inscriptions and Medals. So again, something not a precursor to formal archaeological academies in many ways. And Baudelot suggested, from reading the title of Cernunnos, that the beginning of his name means horn, and that the honorific Nunnos identifies him as a master of place. And thus, Baudelot suggested that this was a version of Pan, but by another name. But I have misleadingly included here on the slide the most famous image of Cernunnos. That is not the image that Baudelot actually talks about. This image on the left here, where Cernunnos is seated, a man with stag's antlers surrounded by wild animals holding a torque and a ram-horned serpent in his hand, is from the Gunderstrup Cauldron. But the only attested inscription of Cernunnos' names comes from other way. There we go. The Pillar of Boatmen. This is a Gallo-Roman commemorative stele, probably commissioned by a guild of maritime or riverine navigators to propitiate deities associated with travel and commerce and good business. And so we can infer that Cernunnos probably was one of them. Only about a third of the image of Cernunnos himself survives, and here it is on screen. It is the upper half, his head and shoulders. You can see that he is a bearded man with what looks to be stag's antlers springing from his hair. On both the antlers are suspended torques or bangles, and we can see that he is dressed in some kind of draped tunic. The inscription, as it is now displayed in the Cluny Museum in Paris, it misses its first and last letters. So we can only infer that what it actually reads as Cernunnos. But Darval seems to be fairly certain that the first letter was indeed C, and that is what he recorded in his first archaeological report sketch, which is currently on the screen. So that gives a lot more details of this figure being dressed in an open collared tunic. The antlers are a lot more pronounced. He's definitely bearded and quite aged. And he's potentially bald and maybe has something like stag's ears in addition to the antlers. To the right is a potential reconstruction of the full Cernunnos image. It appears halfway up the stele on one of the faces, and he's imagined to be seated cross-legged based on the proportions of the image in relation to the other images surviving. This puts Cernunnos in an interesting position. He appears on statuary that is very distinctly Roman and yet is not a known Roman deity. So the theory here is that this is a case of interpretatio Romana. This is a process by which when the Roman Empire expanded, the Romans reimagined or re-identified the local deities they encountered as versions of the deities they were familiar with at home. And so this is what gives us figures like Minerva Sulis in Bath. So Bath, the city in England, had a local goddess named Sulis associated with the warm springs there. But the incoming Romans looked at this goddess and thought, oh, that looks a bit like our goddess Minerva. Let's mush the two names together and worship them. This allows the local populace to still worship their gods, but very much under Roman imperial control. So Cernunnos potentially is one of those examples, but we can't necessarily be sure. He might also be, well, the word Cernunnos might not be a name. It might be an epithet for a different existing deity. And Cernunnos has been associated with either Mercury, the god of commerce, coming back to that notion of commerce and trade and movement, or with Hades, the god of the underworld, who's also associated with wealth and the riches that come from the earth. And this is more apparent on other archaeological finds that we think depict Cernunnos. Here are two of them, the Reims altar and the Vonduvars stele. On the Reims altar, Cernunnos is again seated cross-legged on a raised seat, wearing a torque over his neck, holding a sack of grain, or people say it's beech mast, which I don't know how they can tell it from like pebbles spilling out of a sack, but okay. He is bearded. He used to have very clearly antlers that reach above his head and kind of frame the portico above him, but they have since been either lost or chiseled off. His face is quite badly damaged, but he is feeding a bull and a stag at his feet, and he's flanked by two Roman nude male figures. And then on the right, on the Vonduvars stele, you also have a seated antlered figure, again with quite severely damaged features, holding a sack in their lap. So that's where the association with wealth comes from, whether that's monetary wealth or whether it's wealth, literal wealth from the ground, so grain and elements of fertility. All of these archaeological finds that we can convincingly argue are depictions of Cernunnos come from modern day France. There is, of course, the Gundestrup cauldron that also depicts a cross-legged, antlered figure that was found in Denmark in 1891. But lacking an inscription, the only thing we can say is that that figure really looks like a figure in France that we know to be Cernunnos. If the deity is depicted on the Gundestrup cauldron is indeed Cernunnos himself, then his cult must have been enormous, spanning from Denmark to potentially northern Italy, with another hypothetical depiction of the deity being found in Valcamorica in northern Italy. Again, it's a carving in on a cliff face in a valley, just picturing an antlered figure, this time standing and without attributes of wealth or fertility. Here we have another example, the Sand statue. On the left, we have a headless male figure holding a torque and a sack of something. And again, he's sitting cross-legged next to a female companion holding a cornucopia or a horn of plenty. Of course, the head is missing, so we can never know whether this figure was antlered. But also there is a hypothesis that Cernunnos need not necessarily have always been an antlered figure, that his attributes are, broadly speaking, torques, grain, sacks of things, grain sometimes, the ram-headed serpent that pops up in several locations, and the cross-legged posture, which is sometimes referred to as a Buddhic or yogic posture, sometimes known as the tailor's seat, and has been variously described as a kind of an allusion to the fact that he's sitting on the ground and that's where his power and wealth comes from, or that he is representing a Gallic deity, that is the local population of France under Roman rule, who used low cushions or seats to sit on. So that distinguishes him from Roman deities that would have used more kind of modern-looking chairs. At the beginning of the 20th century, British antiquarians and archaeologists were desperate to have a Cernunnos image in the UK. They really wanted the British to have a claim on the horned deity. But unfortunately, that was not to be. And Ronald Hutton in Pagan Britain writes quite convincingly that there is just no archaeological evidence for the cult of Cernunnos to have spread into the British Isles, and that if it was a single historical deity, it was very reasonable to assume it to be localized to France. And this association with the horned gods is really brought in by Margaret Murray. But she is not the first person to draw the links between Cernunnos and other horned gods, which we'll explore more on the course. For instance, Harold Peake, the famous early 20th century archaeologist and friend of Margaret Murray's academic advisor, Flinders Petrie. It's a small world and they all talk to each other, so you can really see how Murray gets these ideas. Harold Peake writes that the old Gallic god Cernunnos, though without arguing that there is necessarily a connection between this deity and the sorcerer of Trois Frères, sorry, I mistyped this quote, but effectively what he's arguing is that he believes that Cernunnos is connected to the sorcerer of Trois Frères, which is this prehistoric cave image, again, in southern France from 14,000 years ago, that depicts a masked hybrid male figure with pronounced antlers engaged in what his discoverers quaintly termed a cakewalk dance, with his arms upraised. But Peake argued that the two figures are somehow connected across the centuries. So did Flinders Petrie. And then, of course, they must have influenced Murray as her academic seniors to then produce the horned god as a figure that combines these two historical elements, these two notable archaeological finds. And finally, we come to the Gunderstrap Cauldron, which is the somehow, despite not actually being clearly titled Cernunnos, is the best known image of Cernunnos for modern pagans and many people today. This image has appeared on numerous book covers and even more merchandise, probably because of its clarity. The cauldron is quite vast. It is plated in silver and so has survived quite well. And Cernunnos is on its inner face on one of the sections of the cauldron, surrounded by wild animals, with his ram horned serpent and his torque, quite a striking figure to look at. Even though we can never be sure whether this is Cernunnos, it speaks to the desire to draw a line between all antlered figures that we come across. And that is absolutely the case with this figure on the right, this little seated figurine of a man, probably either sitting back on his haunches, maybe he's cross-legged, we can't really tell, with a torque clasped in both hands in front of him over his stomach. This was found in 2019 on Wimpole Estate in kind of central UK, in the centre, near southeast, near Cambridgeshire, if that says anything. And the initial archaeological report, after the figure has just been discovered, stated that this was a version of Cernunnos. And of course, he doesn't have antlers, but he has a torque, and he is sitting down. And of course, unfortunately, later with a more detailed analysis, the report was withdrawn, saying that really there is nothing that identifies this figure of Cernunnos. There is no previous evidence that Cernunnos was worshipped in the British Isles, but we really want to believe that he was, and so we're looking for clues. So maybe new archaeological finds will come to light that will confirm this theory.
Still 5 minutes, Anna.
Thank you very much. Of course, Cernunnos enjoys a rich afterlife in fiction, be it comic books. Here he is alongside Wonder Woman and Batman on Earth 1. And the other picture on this slide is the young Morgaine, a version of Morgana, King Arthur's sister, encountering what she describes to be Cernunnos in a French comic book, The Legend of the Sword. He provides inspiration for a whole host of fantasy creatures who are not even necessarily called the Horned God, and yet embody that mystique of the wild, the ancient past, and forces beyond human ken. But who is this? Who is this horned goddess? Suddenly, the final image for today is a little seated figure of distinctly older female with stag's antlers. She's sitting down on what looks to be a chair, holding a horn of plenty and a patera, which is an offering dish. She is housed in the British Museum. She has not been identified beyond being called a goddess. And I have some theories about who she might be that are to do if we click back to the Sans altar. Oh, there we go. Clicked. There we go. Oh, there we go. There we go. This figure holding the cornucopia sitting next to what people imagine to be Cernunnos. I think she and our little antlered statuette are connected. But to find out how, you'll need to register for the module. And for now, I shall thank you for your attention and any questions.
Thank you for the excellent session, Anna. We do have a question from Larry. Larry writes, is your thesis available to download and read? Are you publishing it?
I am currently preparing it for publication. So I'm currently pitching to editors and I'm hoping, again, academic publication, unfortunately, the gears grind very slowly. So maybe in a couple of years it will be out, but I do absolutely plan to release it. In the meantime, I try to publish scholarly articles, which hopefully will be out a bit quicker, but I can keep you updated.